From streets filled with protests to backroom diplomacy and billion-dollar arms deals, Ukraine is facing pressure on all fronts. As Zelenskyy reshapes key institutions and global allies step up military support, the stakes keep rising, at home and on the battlefield. Well, let's break it all down. This is The Gaze. Don't forget to follow our website, YouTube, and socials for more sharp takes and frontline reporting. Ukraine is reforming the anti-corruption state entities, National Anti-Corruption Bureau and Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. From now on, they will be subjugated directly to the Prosecutor General of Ukraine and will have to start criminal processes and investigations at their demand. Such a decision to take control over the anti-corruption entities led to protests all over the country, with people demanding to stop the reform immediately. The reform comes after several prominent former government high-ranking officials and businessmen have allegedly left the territory of the country at war, helped by Bureau's detectives. Other reasons for the reform are also being named: Russian influence, namely Russian agents' infiltration of the Anti-Corruption Bureau, forcing it from within to stall some high-value corruption cases for years. Following the protest, Volodymyr Zelenskyy addressed the people in his evening appeal.
One more thing. I spoke with NABU Director Semyon Krivonos, SAPO Prosecutor Oleksandr Klimenko, Prosecutor General Ruslan Kravchenko, and Head of the Security Service of Ukraine Vasyl Malyuk. We discussed various challenges, all of them. The anti-corruption infrastructure will work, only without Russian influence. It needs to be cleared of that, and there should be more justice. Of course, anti-corruption infrastructure will work, and it is important that the Prosecutor General is determined to ensure that in Ukraine, the inevitability of punishment for those who go against the law is actually ensured. This is what Ukraine really needs. The cases that have been lying dormant must be investigated.
Ukraine has signed 4 more contracts in interceptor drones purchase worth over $75 million. This was announced by Zelenskyy. Earlier, he reported that the interceptor drones showed great performance in action.
We spoke in great detail with the government and the military about purchasing drones, all types of drones, including interceptor drones. In addition, deep strikes and drones for the front. I ordered to expand contracts as much as possible. We take everything that can protect our cities from Shahidin and positions on the front.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy also held a meeting dedicated to preparations for new prisoner exchanges with the Russian Federation. According to him, Ukraine has managed to significantly intensify this process in recent months. Amongst those released are those who were previously considered missing in action and those who were detained and remained in Russian prisons and detention camps even before the start of the full-scale Russian invasion.
We expect several stages of exchanges to implement the agreements of the second meeting in Istanbul and continue our other activities to free our people, both military and civilians. The Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine is coordinating this work. All necessary forces and institutions are involved. We must restore justice, and for this we are working at all levels: legal, political, special operations. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, President of Ukraine, on Telegram.
The Netherlands will make a significant contribution to the supply of American Patriot air defense systems to Ukraine. This was stated by the Minister of Defense of the Netherlands, Ruben Brekelmans. During the online meeting in the Ramstein format, the minister recalled that the Netherlands independently provides Ukraine with additional air defense systems, namely ammunition for the F-16, counter-drone systems, and radars. A message on the website of the Ministry of Defense of the Netherlands quotes the head of the department, who noted that the Russian air campaign of terror has recently reached new levels, since, according to Brekelmans, Russia's goal is simple: to break the unyielding Ukrainian people.
We cannot allow this to happen. That is why we want to make a significant contribution to additional air defense for Ukraine. Much has already been done, but more is needed. Only by continuing to support Ukraine tirelessly and massively, and increasing pressure on Russia, will we force it to sit down at the negotiating table. Ukraine is defending the front line against Russian aggression for all of Europe. If Russia manages to break through, it will immediately create a major threat to the rest of Europe and NATO. Ruben Brekelmans, Dutch Minister of Defense from a statement on the department's website.
US President Donald Trump has announced a buildup of missiles and ammunition production in the few months, saying the US will have more munition than any other country in the world. Simultaneously, General Syrskyi, the commander-in-chief of Ukraine's armed forces, said that presence of long-range missiles for Ukraine is per se deterrent against Russian aggression. He also expressed hopes for a faster flow of such an important weapons and decisions on its delivery by President Trump, as well as a sustainable position of his on the matter.
They're targeting virtually everything: airfields, populated areas, infrastructure, facilities. So, of course, we need supplies of ballistic missiles in order to be able to give the enemy a fitting rebuff. The availability of any missile weapons is in itself a deterrent. I hope that, thanks to President Trump's position, this process will be much easier, and we won't have any of the difficulties we had before. Oleksandr Syrskyi, commander-in-chief of the AFU, in an interview for the Washington Post.
The European Union is seeking to ensure that all G7 countries join the new dynamic purchase price cap on Russian oil, which was established in accordance with the 18th sanction package. This was stated at a briefing in Brussels by the European Commission's trade representative Olaf Gill. At the same time, Mr. Gill didn't specify whether the European Union is ready to follow the call of U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent to join the U.S. initiative to introduce secondary tariffs on those countries that continue to buy Russian oil, if this initiative is approved.
That as regards the new price cap mechanism, our intention is to discuss it with the G7 price cap coalition. We have already been in touch with them, of course, while we were preparing this, with a view to aligning as best as possible in future. Our aim is that other G7 members will eventually adopt such cap levels when the new adjustment is made by the Commission. And you may be aware that the UK announced on Friday that it was joining the new lower caps.
The United States expects Europe to join its potential secondary tariffs against Russia. This was announced by U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. As Donald Trump previously stated, the restrictions will come into force on the 3rd of September if the Kremlin doesn't agree to a ceasefire in Ukraine. Commenting on this ultimatum from Trump to Russia, Bessent points out that about 90 senators are ready to make it happen and toughen anti-Russian resolutions. Moscow has effectively rejected U.S. President Donald Trump's demand for a ceasefire agreement in Ukraine within the next 50 days. Analysts at the Institute for the Study of War write in their report. In turn, the Kremlin continues to claim that Russia can withstand any economic pressure and continue to fight.
Western economic pressure, coupled with sustained Western military support, is needed for Ukraine to allow Ukrainian forces to inflict combat losses on Russia in order to force Putin to reconsider his calculations and engage in substantive peace talks to end the war. From the ISW report.
Refusing to compromise in the war would be a colossal strategic mistake for Putin. This is what the Washington Post writes. According to observers, this decision could cost Moscow its regional influence, lucrative energy markets in particular, and its place in the world in general. The article notes that Putin's demands not to allow Ukraine into NATO and to recognize territories the Kremlin has annexed are not all based on protecting Russia's interests. Rather, they are based on revenge against Ukraine for not becoming an obedient ally like Belarus. Russia plans to spend about $1.1 trillion on rearmament by 2036. This was stated by the head of the main directorate of the intelligence of the Ministry of Defense, Lieutenant General Kirill Budanov, in his speech at a panel discussion during the annual meeting of Ukrainian ambassadors. As part of the military reform, 2 new military districts have already been created in the Russian Federation, Moscow and Leningrad district, and the formation of new divisions, formations and military units is also planned. The Russians are also trying to conduct hybrid information and cyber operations on the territory of other states. Through controlled media and opinion leaders, they interfere in the civilized democratic process, said the head of intelligence.
Russia seeks to destroy the current security and economic order. To do this, Moscow is increasing its presence in Africa, primarily using its proxy forces, the Wagner PMC and the African Corps, as well as supporting authoritarian regimes and terrorist organizations around the world. Moscow aims to impose on countries its own vision of the future world order, where the great states, primarily the Russian Federation, have complete power, a monopoly on all critical resources, and decide the fate of the world in a closed circle. Kirilo Budanov, head of the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, in a comment for media.
On the 23rd of July, the Ukrainian and Russian delegations will hold the third round of talks in Turkey, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy announced. The Kremlin said that the parties' positions remain opposing. Putin's press secretary believes that there is no point in counting on a breakthrough at this meeting. My colleague Nikita Skoblikov will give you more details.
The Ukrainian delegation at the talks with Russia in Istanbul will be led by Rustem Umerov, Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council. President Zelenskyy said the delegation also included representatives from the main intelligence directorate, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Office of the President. The key topics for the new round of negotiations with Moscow are also known.
Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, Rustem Umerov, proposed that the Russian side hold a new meeting of representatives in Turkey. The aim of the meeting is clear to us: the return of prisoners, the return of children who were abducted by Russia, and the preparation of a meeting of leaders.
The Kremlin also confirmed its participation in the negotiations with the Ukrainian delegation in Istanbul. Moscow has not changed the composition of the negotiation group, nor has it shown any signs of striving for peace. Putin's press secretary Dmitry Peskov said that the parties' proposals on the principles of peace talks and possible conditions for a ceasefire remain diametrically opposed. Peskov was unable to answer the question of whether Putin is ready to meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. According to him, a lot of work still needs to be done. I quote, "before talking about high-level negotiations."
It is very important that these meetings be substantive, that the other side has a mandate to discuss those very main issues: ending the war, achieving a truce. We do not see this yet, so one of the proposals was that we could really discuss such strategic issues, hold a meeting at the level of Zelenskyy, Putin. With the participation, this would be very good, of President Trump, the leaders of Europe, President Erdogan.
This is already the third round of talks with Russia. From the very beginning, Moscow has demonstrated its reluctance to engage in serious dialogue on ending the war against Ukraine. It all began with the extremely low level of representation of Russian delegation, especially in comparison to the Ukrainian delegation. When Moscow finally presented its so-called memorandum on a peace settlement, it turned out that it Putin demands that Ukraine hand over to Russia territories that the Russian army does not even control. The international community has increased pressure on the Kremlin to achieve real progress in the peace process. Incidentally, Moscow decided to take part in the third round of talks only after Trump's ultimatum to impose trade tariffs on Russia and its partners if it doesn't agree to a ceasefire within 50 days. Turkey, which is hosting the talks, welcomed the resumption of dialogue.
President Erdogan noted the importance of the start of the third round of talks between Russia and Ukraine, stating that Turkey will continue to host the talks in Istanbul. From the message of the Office of the President of Turkey on the social network X.
Analysts at the American Institute for the Study of War know that Putin is still not ready for a real ceasefire. In their opinion, only real defeats of the Russian army on a battlefield can change this position.
Only significant Russian setbacks on the battlefield, made possible by timely and sufficient Western military aid to Ukrainian forces, will force Putin to reconsider Russia's ability to defeat Ukraine militarily and bring it to the negotiating table. From the ISW report,
the concept of peace through strength in relation to Russia is today supported by all of Europe. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy emphasizes only a demonstration of determination and strength can force the Russian dictator to sit down at the negotiation table. That is why, according to him, Kyiv needs more weapons and tougher sanctions, pressure on Russia. Reported by Nikita Skoblikov, Pavlo Shtermach, UATV News.
Ukraine is reforming, resisting, and rearming. But the clock is ticking. From drone contracts to diplomacy, from protests to prisoner swaps, every move now could shape how this war ends. Drop your thoughts in the comments and stay tuned for more on The Gaze.